I have to be honest with you right off the bat today. Usually, when I prep for these deep dives, I have a whole system.
Right. You're a very organized person.
Yeah, exactly. I have a very specific workflow. I've got my highlighters. Yellow is for facts, pink is for quotes. I have my margins filled with notes. I try to categorize everything into neat little buckets, you know?
Like theology, politics, economics.
Exactly. No, not at all. Is it theology? Is it geopolitical strategy? Is it some kind of sci-fi manifesto about AI economics? Or maybe literary criticism?
It's sort of the kitchen sink approach to the apocalypse. But
Mm.
even saying that feels, I don't know, too reductive. It's more like a grand unified theory of, well, everything.
It is way beyond the kitchen sink. It's
Yeah.
the plumbing, the foundation, the roof, the whole neighborhood. We're looking at a document from the Netizen blog. The author is Paramendra Kumar Bhagat. And the title alone is just a total stopper.
It really is.
It's one of those titles that physically forces you to stop scrolling. Quote, "The Jews, the Christians, the Hindus have been waiting for the same person." End quote.
And we should clarify immediately, he doesn't mean that metaphorically.
Right.
He's not saying something vague like, oh, humanity universally desires peace, so we're all waiting for a spirit of peace.
No, he means it completely literally. He is claiming that the central figures of these massive, completely distinct and often competing faiths are actually the exact same entity. And here's the part where I literally have to put my coffee down very slowly.
He says this person is on Earth.
On Earth, right now, today,
I mean,
2026.
It's a wildly radical document. And I think the reason your highlighting system broke down and why this is so difficult to categorize is that the author Bhagat is intentionally trying to shatter the categories we use to understand reality.
Yeah, he really is.
He's making the argument that you absolutely cannot understand the current Middle East crisis, specifically involving Iran, without understanding the ancient Hindu text, the Mahabharata.
Which is wild.
Right. And he says you can't understand the future of artificial intelligence and robotics without understanding the book of Isaiah from the Bible. He's taking ancient scripture, modern geopolitics, and futuristic economics and try to forge them into a single seamless narrative.
And so that is our mission for today's deep dive. We're not here to say, hey, this is true or this is absolutely false. We aren't theologians.
And we certainly aren't prophets.
Definitely not. We're here to map out this worldview for you. Because if he is even partially right about how the people involved in this narrative are thinking, it explains a massive amount of the chaos we're seeing on the news every night.
Exactly. We need to step inside the internal logic of the text. We essentially have to hang our own skepticism at the door for the next hour or so and ask, okay, if this worldview were true, how does the world actually look?
So let's start with the basic framework. The post opens with a phrase that, I'll admit, usually makes me roll my eyes and check for the nearest exit. He says, these are the end times.
Which carries so much baggage.
So much. Instantly, I'm picturing guys in sandwich boards on street corners with megaphones. I'm picturing asteroids, zombies, just total planetary destruction.
The Hollywood Michael Bay explosion version of the apocalypse.
Right, exactly. But he pivots almost immediately. He totally pulls the rug out from under that assumption. Let's talk about how he defines end times, because it is definitely not about the planet blowing up.
He is incredibly specific about this, and it's super crucial for you listening to grasp this definition, or nothing else in this deep dive is going to make any sense. He explicitly states, the end times do not mean the end of the earth.
So if you're waiting for the planet to crack in half, wrong movie.
Exactly. He is talking about a transition of ages. And to understand what that means, we have to look at the Hindu concept of time, because that's the clock he's using to measure everything.
You're talking about the yugas.
The yugas, yeah. See, in the West, we are heavily conditioned to view time linearly. We think of it like an arrow. You start at point A, you go to point B, eventually you die, eventually the sun burns out. It's a straight line.
But in this worldview,
and the one the source is using, time is cyclical. It's a wheel, it has seasons. He breaks down the math for us to give us a sense of scale. A decade is 10 years, a millennium is 1,000 years. But an age, a yuga, is a span of several thousand years. And it doesn't just measure time. It defines the actual quality of human consciousness during that period.
oh, I like that. So it's sort of like environmental conditions, but for the human soul.
That is a brilliant way to put it. It's the atmospheric pressure of the spirit. And the core argument here is that we are currently at the very tail end of a really, really bad season.
Basically the worst one.
Right. Arguably the worst, yes. He says we've been stuck in an age that has lasted over 5,000 years. In Hindu terms, this is the Kali Yuga, the age of darkness.
The bottom of the wheel.
Right. It's an era where humanity is at its furthest point from the divine, furthest from absolute truth, and just completely embroiled in conflict, war, and ignorance.
And he uses this really brilliant analogy to explain why it's been the age of darkness. It's not that the truth just didn't exist out there, it's that we literally couldn't hold it. The teacup analogy.
Yes.
I loved this part because it tackles a very common, often very tense theological argument regarding the rank of different religious figures.
It's a striking comparison. He compares Siddhartha, the Buddha, to Lord Shiva. Now, normally in comparative religion, you don't rank deities like you're trading baseball cards.
Right, that usually offends someone.
Exactly. But he makes a quantitative, measurable claim. He says the Buddha taught his disciples only 1% of what Lord Shiva taught in the previous age, the age of truth.
Which, if you're a practicing Buddhist, sounds like a massive insult right out of the gate. It sounds like he's saying Buddha just wasn't that smart.
It definitely provokes a defensive reaction. You think, why did Buddha know so little? But Bob flips the perspective immediately. He says, Shiva's knowledge has no limits. Buddha's knowledge has no limits. The limiter isn't the teacher.
The limiter is the student.
Precisely.
How much tea will you pour in a teacup? What the teacup will hold, that's the quote.
It's perfect. If you just have a tiny teacup, and I come at you with a massive fire hose of cosmic knowledge, I'm not actually teaching you anything. I'm just drowning you and making a mess. You can't retain it. So the argument here is that for the last 5,000 years, the entirety of humanity has basically been a teacup.
We just didn't have the hardware?
Right. We didn't have the spiritual or intellectual bandwidth to process a full cosmic download. So the great teachers of this dark era, Buddha, Jesus, Muhammad, they gave us exactly what we could handle. They gave us the teacup version of the truth.
Which makes a lot of sense when you look at how simple the core teachings usually are. You know, be nice to your neighbor, don't steal, show compassion.
The absolute basics, foundational stuff. They're essentially survival mechanisms designed for a dark age. But the claim here is that the end times isn't a destruction, it's a graduation ceremony.
We're getting a bigger cup.
We're moving from a teacup to a bucket, or an ocean. He says in the coming age, the Satya Yuga, or Age of Truth, human capacity is going to increase 100-fold. We're literally graduating from primary school to university.
And university obviously has a much harder curriculum.
Much harder,
Yeah.
and vastly more complex. It requires a completely different type of thinking. In primary school, you just learn the rules, don't hit.
Yeah.
But in university, you learn physics. You learn the mechanics of how the system actually operates.
Which brings us to the real core thesis of this entire document, the grand unification. Because if we are graduating to university, we clearly need a professor who is qualified to teach the advanced class. And this is where the author really he swings for the fences.
Here he does.
He claims that the central figures of all the major world religions are actually the exact same entity, just appearing at different times.
This is the pivot point of the whole blog post. If you accept this premise, the rest of his logic completely follows. If you reject it, the whole thing shatters. The source explicitly identifies the biblical Yahweh, the God of the Old Testament, as the Hindu Lord Vishnu.
And he doesn't just make a vague spiritual claim, he builds a highly specific timeline of avatars, these divine incarnations, to back it up. He puts hard dates on them.
Right, let's walk through that timeline, because this is where the deep dive gets really intricate. He starts 7,000 years ago.
Okay.
So 7,000 years ago, at the end of the age before the last one, which is called the Treta Yuga, you have the arrival of Rama.
The hero of the Ramayana, the ideal king figure.
Exactly. Then, fast forward 2,000 years. So now we're at 5,000 years ago. This marks the end of the last age, the Dwapara Yuga, and the avatar for that transition is Krishna.
The central figure of the Mahabharata, the one who delivers the Bhagavad Gita.
Correct. So the pattern is established. Then, 2,500 years ago, we get the Buddha. And the source claims something very specific here. The Buddha explicitly told his disciples, quote, I am Rama, and that he actively relayed stories from the Ramayana.
So he's building a direct continuity. He's saying, I am literally the same guy, I'm just wearing a different outfit because it's a different era.
Exactly. And then we get to Jesus. Now, this is where I think a lot of listeners with Western theological backgrounds might be completely surprised by the connection. How does he fit Jesus, a Jewish carpenter living in the Roman Empire, into a very structured Hindu lineage of avatars?
Yeah, that's a massive leap. How does he justify it?
The source identifies Jesus as wisdom, capital W. It references the Old Testament, where wisdom is often personified, sometimes depicted almost as a distinct entity working right alongside God during creation.
Oh, okay, I follow that.
But then he ties that biblical concept directly back to the Bhagavad Gita. The claim is that Lord Krishna, in the Gita, is answering a question from his great disciple, Arjuna. Arjuna asks him, how will humanity cross the sea of all sin?
The sea of all sin. That is a great visual.
It really is. And Krishna's answer, according to the God, is by way of wisdom.
Oh, wow.
Right. So the source is arguing that wisdom is essentially the prophetic code name for Jesus in the Jewish Bible. So his argument is that the arrival of Jesus was actually prophesied in the Gita, a Hindu text, 3,000 years before Jesus was even born in Bethlehem.
That is wild. So he's saying Krishna basically looked at Arjuna and said, look, I'll be back, but in a totally different form, specifically to handle this sin problem.
Exactly. He frames the Jesus event not as the start of a brand new separate religion, but as a highly specific rescue mission within this much larger cosmic cycle. The sea of sin required a specific type of vessel to cross it, and that vessel was Jesus.
And the author even looks at the Laird's Prayer, which is easily the most famous Christian prayer in the world, and he interprets it as a literal directional signpost. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven.
He takes that very literally. He interprets that prayer not as some vague, comforting hope for the afterlife, but as a concrete political mandate.
A political mandate.
Yes. He argues that the prayer points Christians specifically toward a human incarnation of Yahweh, a, quote, king for all earth, who is supposedly currently here. He's saying Christians have been actively praying for a kingdom on earth for 2,000 years, and if you have a kingdom, you require a king.
And he ties this directly into the concept of the Jewish Messiah as well. Or...
He does. The source claims the Jews are actively waiting for this exact same figure. But there is a major twist here, and it's a real theological curveball. The blog states that the Messiah the Jews are waiting for right now will not be from the line of David.
Wait, why? That's a huge part of Jewish prophecy.
Because, the source argues, Jesus already fulfilled that specific line of prophecy, that line of David box. It's checked, it's done, history moved past it.
Oh, I see.
So the figure arriving now, the one the Jews, Christians, and Hindus are all simultaneously waiting for, is a completely separate arrival, distinct from the Davidic line, but still the exact same divine entity returning.
He even points to the Gospel of John to back up this unification idea. The very first paragraph. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. All things were made by him.
Right. He says, just read that paragraph. It describes the creator of heaven and earth. Now go ask any Hindu who created heaven and earth.
So you're going to say Brahma.
Exactly. He's building this massive linguistic and theological bridge. He's arguing that the Bible describes Hindu deities perfectly, just under localized names. Yahweh is Vishnu. The creator is Brahma. Jesus is wisdom. He's basically doing a giant find and replace on the Bible to show it's actually a Sanatana Dharma text in disguise.
Okay, but here is where I think it gets really interesting for the skeptics in our audience, or maybe the more science-minded folks, because he doesn't just rely on comparing scripture verses. He actually brings NASA into this.
This is such a fascinating inclusion, because usually when you read religious tracts, they rely entirely on faith. You must believe this because the Holy Book says so.
Right, just trust the text.
But Bhagat takes a completely different route. He claims that the ancient epics, the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, are not just mythological stories. He says they are literal time capsules. He asserts that they contain immaculate, highly detailed descriptions of the night sky at the time they occurred.
The best calendar there is, since the pattern never repeats. I really like that line from the blog.
It is an incredibly strong argument, assuming the data actually holds up.
Yeah.
The logic is based on archaeoastronomy. The position of the stars and planets is essentially a unique, unforgeable fingerprint for any specific moment in time.
Because the sky is basically a giant, incredibly complex clock.
Exactly. A clock that doesn't repeat its exact configuration for tens of thousands of years. So if an ancient text says Saturn was in this specific house, Mars was retrograde in that house, and the moon was passing through this exact constellation, that highly specific combination of planetary geometry might only happen once every 5,000 years.
And the source is claiming that NASA actually verified this data.
The source asserts that NASA astronomers have mapped these exact star charts. And he makes a point to emphasize that these are non-Hindu scientists, to suggest completely unbiased secular validation.
Right.
He claims they use these planetary alignments to date the events of the Mahabharata to exactly 5,000 years ago, and the Ramayana to exactly 7,000 years ago. He's using astrophysics to validate the timeline of the avatars we just walked through. If the stars align quite literally, then the timeline of Rama and Krishna isn't mythology. It's recorded history.
So his logic is, if you buy the math of the timeline, you have to buy the pattern. And if you buy the pattern, you have to accept that the next avatar is mathematically due to arrive right now.
It's the law of series. If the 7,000-year mark happened and the 5,000-year mark happened, the alarm clock is ringing for today.
That naturally leads us to this really provocative comparison he makes between the Bible and the Sanatana Dharma. He basically uses physics to explain theology, the whole Newton versus relativity analogy.
I think this is probably the most helpful intellectual tool in the entire document. He compares the Bible to Isaac Newton's law of gravity, and he compares Sanatana Dharma, the Hindu eternal order, to Albert Einstein's theory of relativity.
Let's unpack that. Now, Newton's law is valid, right? Gravity obviously works. If I hold my pen up right now and drop it, it hits the desk. I don't need Einstein to explain why my pen fell.
Exactly. And that's key. He isn't saying the Bible is wrong. Newton's laws are completely foundational. They perfectly explain the localized world we see and interact with every single day. They keep our feet on the ground. They explain why apples fall from trees and why planets orbit the sun in our solar system.
Okay.
Bhagat says the Bible functions exactly like that. It is valid. It is necessary. It is the primary school truth that keeps human society from floating away into total moral chaos. It provides the ethical gravity we need to survive a dark age.
But Newton's physics break down when you push them to the extreme edges of the universe, right?
Right.
Or when you go down to the quantum level. That is where you desperately need Einstein. That is where you need relativity.
Precisely. When you start dealing with the true cosmic scale black holes, the speed of light, time dilation, multidimensional space Newton just isn't enough. The math doesn't work. You need a vastly more complex model. Bhagat is arguing that the Sanatana Dharma is the university-level truth.
So it explains the bigger picture.
Right. It explains the multidimensional, time-bending, soul-reincarnating physics of the spiritual universe.
So he's essentially saying the Bible is the truth designed for the teacup, but Sanatana Dharma is the truth designed for the ocean.
That is exactly the source's argument. He suggests that no religion born during the current age of darkness, which, according to his strict timeline, would explicitly include both Christianity and Islam, has the full, comprehensive spiritual content required for the next age. They were intentionally designed with limitations for the limited capacity of the people living in this era.
But the Sanatana Dharma is different.
Right, because it's the eternal order. He argues it encompasses the highly relativistic, complex spiritual physics needed to thrive in the coming age of truth.
It really is a hierarchy of truths. And he defines what makes something a scripture in a very specific, almost mechanical way, too. He says a book is only scripture because it contains prophecy.
That is his absolute litmus test. He asks the reader, why is the Bible considered scripture? Because it predicts things that actually happen. And following that logic leads him directly to the figure of Kalki.
Kalki, the 10th avatar.
Yes. In Hindu eschatology, Kalki is the final avatar of Vishnu, the one who arrives specifically to end the Kali Yuga, this current age of darkness. The source claims that there are 12 ancient, highly specific prophecies regarding the arrival of Kalki. And here is the real hook for this deep dive.
Yeah.
He claims that 11 of those 12 prophecies have already come true.
And not just come true vaguely, but come true in a specific person currently alive on Earth.
Yes.
Now, we are going to come back to that 12th prophecy at the end of the show because that is a massive cliffhanger. But I want to talk about this other prophecy he mentions regarding Siddhartha, the Buddha. The blog tells a story about an ancient astrologer who looked at the young Siddhartha.
Yeah, the prediction was binary.
Yeah.
The astrologer told Siddhartha's father that the boy would grow up to be one of two things. He would either become a great ascetic, a spiritual renouncer, or he would become the king of all earth.
And obviously history tells us he became the ascetic. He left the palace, meditated, and became the Buddha.
Right. But the source argues that the prophecy wasn't an either situation that just expired once he chose a path. He argues it was a timeline.
Oh, interesting.
He became the ascetic 2,500 years ago during that incarnation. Now, in this current reincarnation in 2026, the source claims the exact same entity is back to fulfill the other half of that ancient prediction, to finally become the king of all earth.
Which brings us squarely into 2026, Saturday, February 21st. Because the source doesn't just theorize about ancient mythological figures. He starts naming real names of people who are in the global news right now.
Yes, the cast of characters.
Honestly, this is the section where my jaw just hit the floor. He literally claims that major figures from the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, and the Bible are currently reincarnated and actively working together in global politics today.
It is a highly specific, very audacious roster. It essentially claims that an elite team has been assembled on Earth to forcefully transition the world from this dark age to the next one.
Let's look at this list because it's something else. First up, Narendra Modi.
The current Prime Minister of India. The source explicitly identifies him as Hanuman from the Ramayana.
Hanuman, the monkey god, the one known as the ultimate devotee.
The very same. In the Ramayana, Hanuman is the figure who serves Rama with just absolute, unparalleled strength and pure devotion. He is the one who leaps all the way across the ocean. He is the one who physically lifts a mountain to bring a healing herb to save a life.
So what does it mean to say the prime minister is Hanuman?
Identifying a sitting prime minister, someone who is already a massive, powerful figure in global geopolitics, as a deity famous for physical strength and subservient devotion, is a really significant theological claim.
It totally reframes his political actions as divine service. It essentially says to his followers, he isn't just a politician running a modern country, he is literally clearing the physical path for the avatar.
Exactly. It adds an impenetrable theological layer to his standard political governance.
Okay, next on the roster is Balin Shah. Now, for listeners who maybe don't follow South Asian municipal politics super closely, who exactly is Balin Shah?
Balin Shah is an incredibly fascinating modern figure. He's actually a structural engineer and a rapper.
Wait, a rapper?
Yes, a hip-hop artist who ran as an independent and became the mayor of Kathmandu in Nepal.
Wow.
The source predicts he is destined to be the next prime minister of Nepal. But theologically, the blog identifies him as Laxman, the notoriously loyal brother of Rama from the Ramayana. And not only that, but also as Balram, the brother of Krishna from the Mahabharata.
So the archetype of the loyal brother is back in play.
Exactly, the archetypal brother. It implies a cosmic rule. Wherever the avatar incarnates, this specific brother soul is always going to be close by, guarding his flank. It suggests a deeply entrenched bond that transcends thousands of lifetimes.
Then there is Ramdev Baba, who is a very famous, very wealthy yoga guru.
Right, and he is identified as Sabri. Now, in the Ramayana, Sabri was an elderly woman. She was a tribal ascetic who waited her entire life, just patiently waiting, simply to have the chance to offer a piece of fruit to Rama when he finally walked through her forest.
That's a very humble role compared to a powerful modern guru.
It is. It implies a role of patient, quiet spiritual waiting and service, identifying a highly powerful, modern, media-savvy billionaire guru as a humble, waiting female devotee. It really flips the script on how we perceive modern power. It suggests his vast empire is purely preparatory for someone else.
But Bhagat doesn't stop at Hindu figures, which is what makes this so strange. He jumps over to the Bible, he says Moses is here, Thomas is here, Job is here, but they aren't who you'd expect them to be.
No, not at all. This is where the specific detail gets very, very intriguing. The source claims that the souls of Moses and the Apostle Thomas are currently, quote, lady pastors.
Lady pastors.
That is the exact phrase he uses.
Wait, lady pastors? Like plural? Does he name them?
He doesn't, which is the fascinating part. He just asserts that they are here, currently in female form, leading modern Christian congregations somewhere in the world.
Why do you think he doesn't name them? I mean, he named Modi, he named Balin Shah. Why leave Moses and Thomas anonymous?
It really adds to the mystique, doesn't it? It invites the reader to look around their own life. Is Moses that famous televangelist on Sunday morning? Is Thomas that quiet, humble leader in your local neighborhood church? It suggests that the team is vast, and not everyone involved is in the global political spotlight.
And he mentions John the Baptist, too.
Yes. The source claims John the Baptist is also here, and even, quote, has the same name, which is a really cryptic but tantalizing clue. Does he mean a guy named John who happens to be a Baptist? Or just a guy literally named John the Baptist? It's a breadcrumb left for the reader.
So why are they all here at the exact same time? It really sounds like the Avengers assembling for a final battle.
That is essentially the exact argument. The source says they are all here concurrently to assist in the project. And the project is the definitive end of the current age and the violent ushering in of the age of abundance. They are the transition team, the midwives for the new epic.
But every good story and every epic ending transition needs a villain. And this document identifies a very specific real-world adversary. Now, we have to be very, very clear here for our listeners.
Right.
We are strictly reporting on what the source material says.
Right. These are highly controversial views.
Yes, but we need to unpack his arguments impartially to understand the author's internal logic. He talks about an anti-religion.
Yes. The source takes an incredibly hardline theological stance against Islam. He describes it not just as a competing faith, but as a literal anti-religion concocted specifically by the devil to harvest human souls during the Dark Age.
That is a very heavy, intense accusation. What is his logical justification for making such a massive claim? He can't just say, I don't like it, and leave it at that. He tries to prove it using theological logic.
He attacks it at the theological root. He argues that the very definition of God requires omnipotence being all-powerful. He claims the Allah of the Quran is not omnipotent because, in his strict view, Allah cannot enter human history.
Meaning Allah cannot incarnate as a human.
Right. He heavily contrasts this with the Hindu view of avatars, where God literally puts on flesh and walks the earth he created. Bhagat argues that if God physically cannot become a human, cannot walk on the soil, then he's not omnipotent. He possesses a hard limitation. And logically, if he has a limitation, he cannot be God.
So purely because Allah doesn't incarnate, the source argues he's a false deity.
That is the philosophical core of it. The other part goes right back to his strict definition of scripture and prophecy. He asks the reader, what prophecy has been attributed to Muhammad? Can you name a single one that came true? The source claims there are none whatsoever. And since his rule is that prophets are only valid because they speak verifiable prophecies, he argues there is no historic Muhammad in the true prophetic sense.
And this isn't just abstract theological debating for him. He ties this ancient religious argument directly to the volatile geopolitical situation right now in 2026. We are looking at massive tensions involving Iran.
Correct. The source draws a direct historical parallel to the great mythological wars of the past. He points out a pattern. The Satya Yuga ended with a war. The Treta Yuga Rama's age ended with a catastrophic Ramayana war. The Dwapara Yuga Krishna's age ended with the bloody Mahabharata war. Therefore, by the law of series, this current age must also end with a massive war.
And the sides of this war are already drawn.
According to the source, definitively yes. He explicitly labels Islamists as the modern forces of evil, directly comparing them to Duryodhana and Ravana. Now, these were the ultimate villains of the ancient Indian epics. And the key characteristic he highlights to connect them is that they, quote, did not reason.
The truly evil do not reason, they fight to the finish. That's his quote.
That is the quote. And because of that specific, unyielding psychological trait, the source argues that the forces of good must maintain a state of maximum preparedness. He's arguing that you simply cannot negotiate with a specific type of cosmic energy. You have to be ready to completely overwhelm it.
It is a very hawkish, militaristic stance.
Very. And it's completely justified in his mind by ancient mythology. He is essentially telling world leaders diplomacy is guaranteed to fail because the cosmic script literally demands a final battle.
It's super interesting, though, that he predicts resistance to this new avatar won't just come from the adversary. He says the resistance is going to come from the believers themselves. He says even deeply religious people, devout Jews and Christians, are going to really struggle to accept this new Messiah.
That is actually a very profound psychological insight embedded within the text. He predicts that when this king for all earth finally reveals himself, many religious leaders will point at him and say, look, the devil. He attributes this massive misidentification to pride, specifically institutional pride within the priestly class.
It's the classic, he didn't come the way we expected him to problem, right?
Exactly. I mean, imagine you were a high-ranking priest or a famous pastor today. You have said your specific texts your entire life. You have a very rigidly defined movie playing in your head of exactly how the end times are supposed to look.
Right. Maybe the Messiah comes floating down on a glowing cloud. Maybe he's wearing very specific ancient robes.
Exactly. But what if he shows up as a guy in a suit who talks extensively about AI algorithms and quotes the Bhagavad Gita? You're going to reject him instantly. You're going to say, hold on, this doesn't match my notes. This is a deception.
So the source warns that the devil essentially appeals to the intellectual pride of those who think they already possess the absolute truth.
Yes, the priestly class fundamentally believes they own the exclusive copyright on God. If God dares to show up in a package they didn't pre-approve, they will fight him tooth and nail.
Wow. So we have the reincarnated team, we have the inevitable war, we have the confusion among the faithful. But let's look at the final destination. If we actually survive this end of the age battle, what is waiting on the other side? He calls it the age of abundance.
This is where the blog takes a hard pivot from ancient scripture right into modern futurism. It's honestly like switching from reading the Ten Commandments to watching an episode of Star Trek.
Yeah, the tonal shift is crazy.
The source cites the cutting edges of AI and robotics as the literal mechanical mechanism for ushering in this new divine age.
He talks about building a post-scarcity economy.
Yes. The argument is that physical currency money becomes entirely irrelevant, not in the sense that society collapses and we go back to bartering chickens for wheat, but that technology creates such a massive, overwhelming abundance of goods and services that the very concept of cost simply evaporates.
It totally reminds me of the replicator in Star Trek. You walk up to a wall, say tea, Earl Grey, hot, and it's there. You don't swipe a credit card for that. It just manifests.
That seems to be exactly his vision. If hyper-advanced robots are doing 100% of the physical labor, and fusion energy is essentially free, and material goods are infinite, why on earth do we need money? And he directly ties this futuristic economic abundance to ancient spiritual abundance. He quotes the book of Isaiah, referencing the prophecy of a time with absolutely no war. Universal peace.
Because logically, if you trace it back, we almost always fight over scarce resources.
Exactly. If land, food, and energy are completely infinite, what is there left to fight a war over? The source is arguing that the AI technological revolution is the promised spiritual revolution. They aren't two separate events. The robots are literally the tools that God is using to deliver the utopian promise of the ancient scriptures.
But even in this incredible utopia, there are still rules.
Yeah.
He mentions a new caste system. Now, caste is a very loaded word, especially if you're looking at a South Asian context. It almost always implies systemic oppression, birthright, rigid social hierarchy, but he completely redefines it.
Radically redefines it. He says, in the New Age, being a Brahmin, which is traditionally the highest caste associated with priests, scholars, the elite, is absolutely not about your birth.
Okay.
It is not about your last name. It is not about your DNA or your family wealth. It is entirely about habit.
So what are the actual requirements to be a Brahmin in this new age of abundance?
He lists 3 highly specific behavioral criteria.
Yeah.
Number 1, not eating meat. Number 2, not drinking alcohol. Number 3, not smoking.
That's it. Clean living makes you the highest caste.
That is the claim. He states that this new system is meant for all humanity. It is a total democratization of spiritual status, based entirely on personal daily conduct rather than ancient lineage.
I see.
It perfectly aligns with his earlier idea of increased human capacity, the bigger teacup. If you want to hold more of the cosmic tea, you simply need a cleaner vessel. He views these specific substances, dead meat, alcohol, smoke, as literal physical impurities that muddy the spiritual signal.
It is just such a strange, potent, and fascinating mix of ideas. You have this Elon Musk-style AI techno-utopia, seamlessly blended with strict ascetic dietary laws, blended with ancient mythological warfare.
That is the defining signature of this specific worldview. It completely refuses to separate the technological from the spiritual. In the author's mind, you simply cannot have the economic abundance without the personal physical discipline. And you cannot have the era of universal peace without surviving the final apocalyptic war first.
All right, let's try to synthesize all of this. We are looking at a blog post published yesterday, February 20th, 2026. It claims the world is about to violently flip a switch. We are moving from the 5,000-year age of darkness into the age of truth.
Correct. A cosmic graduation.
We have a detailed star chart analysis that claims to mathematically validate the Hindu epics as being 5,000 and 7,000 years old, putting them on a strict, repeating timeline that leads directly to our present day.
Validated, allegedly, by non-Hindu NASA astronomers.
We have a very real modern geopolitical crisis with Iran that is being framed not as politics, but as the final prophesied battle of the age, essentially a bloody replay of the Mahabharata.
With specific, currently sitting political figures explicitly identified as reincarnated ancient warriors.
And tying every single piece of this together is this central figure, the one king for all Earth, the single person that Jews, Christians, and Hindus have apparently been unknowingly waiting for.
Who the source emphatically claims is currently alive on Earth right now.
It really asks the listener and anyone who reads the blog to look out at the absolute chaos of 2026. You look at the wars, the terrifying AI breakthroughs, the rising religious tension, and it asks you to see a pattern in the noise. And not just a pattern, but a deliberate plan.
And honestly, that is the deep psychological allure of such a grand theory.
Mm.
It takes the deafening noise of the modern world, which usually just feels overwhelming, terrifying, and completely random, and it meticulously organizes it into a coherent narrative. It looks you in the eye and tells you this isn't random chaos, this is the curriculum. It gives profound meaning to the struggle.
It definitely answers the big so what question we always ask on this show. The source argues that wisdom, the path of Jesus, was essentially the life raft we needed to survive and get across the sea of sin during the Dark Age. But the Sanatana Dharma is the advanced curriculum for the university era we are about to enter.
It suggests a very pragmatic view of religion, that we simply needed different tools for different eras. And right now, the tools are fundamentally changing. We're being forced to upgrade our spiritual operating system.
Okay, before we completely wrap up, I promised the listeners we would come back to that cliffhanger. The prophecies.
Right. The source extensively mentions Lord Kalki, the final 10th avatar of Vishnu. It claims there are exactly 12 ancient prophecies regarding his arrival.
And it claims 11 of those 12 have already come true in the specific person currently walking around on Earth.
Which naturally leads us to the final truly provocative thought of the day. If 11 have already happened, what exactly is the 12th prophecy?
Right. And what happens the exact moment it is fulfilled? Does the sky literally change color? Does all the money in our bank accounts just disappear? Or does the final war officially start?
That is the massive question the source intentionally leaves hanging in the air. If his timeline is correct, we are apparently living in the pregnant pause between the 11th and the 12th prophecy, the deep breath right before the plunge.
Well, if the source is right, we won't have to wait very long to find out. We are quite literally living through history right now, folks. Whether you see all of this as just a normal political cycle, a disruptive technological revolution, or the literal turning of a cosmic wheel, keep your eyes open. The patterns are definitely there if you look closely enough for them. Thank you for diving deep with us today.
It was an absolute pleasure.
We will see you in the next age, or, maybe just next week. Take care, everyone.